During World War II, the Nazi regime under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler sought to increase the efficiency of concentration camps. Himmler ordered the organization of brothels or bordellos in 10 concentration camps as part of an insidious strategy by which the Nazis deliberately humiliated prisoners. Applications for work in the brothels were supposedly voluntary, but this was far from the truth. The topic of false prostitution in concentration camps has been hushed up for a long time, but survivors like Margaret, a prisoner of Buchenwald, have recounted their experiences in memoirs. Margaret was one of 16 women who worked as prostitutes for male prisoners in the SS concentration camp system. The women had the sole task of serving men. The idea to organize such brothels in concentration camps came a year earlier to SS chief Heinrich Himmler himself. It was not about doing something good for the emaciated, tortured male prisoners who were used as slaves. Himmler wanted to increase the productivity of his slaves, which was very low due to the poor living conditions in the camps. Therefore, in March 1942, he ordered to send diligently working female prisoners on a voluntary basis to brothels. From 1942, such brothels were organized in a total of 10 camps such as Sachsenhausen, Mauthausen, Buchenwald, and even in Auschwitz. At first, women were recruited from the Ravensbrück women's concentration camp, but later they began to be selected from other camps. It was mostly about German women since Jewish women were not chosen for racial reasons. Antonia Brugge, an Austrian resistance fighter who survived the Ravensbrück camp, revealed that there was a distinction made between the women sent to the SS brothel and those sent to the soldiers' brothel. According to Brugge, the most attractive women were sent to the SS brothel while the less attractive ones were sent to the soldiers' brothel. The SS recruited 10 women for the Mauthausen concentration camp, in line with the government security agency's guidelines for establishing brothels and forced labor camps. These women were expected to serve between 300 and 500 men each. For some time, the SS also promised these women that they would be released from detention in a concentration camp in 6 months. But true voluntariness in the conditions of the concentration camp, of course, was out of the question because at first, the SS created an inhumane system from which women were then protected. However, participation in this saved their lives. According to historian Robert Sommer, almost all women who went through the work of a false prostitute survived. However, despite this, some of them still died in Nazi concentration camps. When the women agreed, they were first quarantined and given a thorough medical examination, especially for the presence of sexually transmitted diseases. At this time, they were well fed and physically nursed. After all, they used to live in terrible conditions of a concentration camp, which was reflected on their body. However, for the SS, the aesthetic aspect was not the most important. Women had to be healthy and able-bodied. Then they went to a special building in the camps, as the SS called the brothel. The special buildings were designed in such a way that a corridor ran through the center from which it was possible to get into rooms with women. These rooms were very simply equipped. It is noteworthy that all the prisoners who wanted to visit the brothel also had to undergo a medical examination. Then they could visit a room with an involuntary prostitute. In order for everything to take place within the rules, excess people could constantly observe what was happening through the viewing hole in the door. Then the concentration camp prisoner had to undergo a thorough medical examination. The spread of sexually transmitted diseases, in any case, should have been prevented. The Nazis called the rights to go to a brothel a privilege. Sommer estimates that only about 1% of concentration camp prisoners have been to brothels or more. At the same time, it was about prisoners belonging to the upper stratum of the concentration camp, as a rule, working prisoners. For them, such a visit should have been a reward for good work. However, it cost 2 stamps, which many prisoners had no way to get. The brothels in the concentration camps were part of an insidious strategy by which the SS deliberately humiliated prisoners. Because an increase in the productivity of workers could be achieved by improving nutrition for all prisoners, but Himmler did not want that at all. When men went to a brothel, they humiliated themselves in front of assessment. At the same time, they also became complicit in the sexual exploitation of women. But for women, the situation was especially difficult. They became victims of the Nazis and prisoners. Although the topic of false prostitution in concentration camps became known shortly after the fall of the Third Reich, it was resolutely hushed up. It was only in the early 90s that some women like Margaret were not afraid to talk about their life in a concentration camp. Until then, no one was interested in this. Neither the men who were served by women nor the women themselves, because they were afraid that their fate could be presented as if they literally voluntarily worked in brothels. By the way, there are not many of these women. Several hundred became victims, but their fate is of great importance because it shows that the Nazis wanted to insult, humiliate, and mock the prisoners of the camps in any conceivable way. In fact, for these women, it was only about survival, and at least in this, they were successful. The use of brothels in Nazi concentration camps was an appalling strategy aimed at further dehumanizing and exploiting prisoners. The women who were forced to work in these brothels had to endure unimaginable suffering and humiliation, and their fate has only recently been acknowledged. It is important to remember their experiences and to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated.